The colony of New Horizon had seen many things since its founding, but nothing like this. The settlers were pioneers, far removed from Earth's bustling core worlds, living simple lives on the edges of human expansion. They had faced harsh winters, food shortages, and the occasional pirate raid. But this was different. The ship was unlike any human vessel. It had no visible thrusters, no lights, no insignia. Just a smooth, black surface that swallowed the light around it. It was impossibly large, larger than any warship ever built. And it did nothing. No response to hails. No movement. It simply existed. Tension spread across the colony like wildfire. Families locked their doors. Parents held their children close. The Planetary Council gathered in a state of emergency. Was this the beginning of an invasion? A first contact? Or something worse? Captain Reed, the head of security, stood in the control center, watching the ship through the colony's main observation screen. He had been in this room during pirate attacks before, but he had never seen his men this tense. "Any change?" he asked, not taking his eyes off the screen. "Nothing, sir," replied Lieutenant Davis, his voice tight. "No power signatures. No transmissions. Just waiting." Reed clenched his jaw. Ships didn't just wait. Ships had purpose. Missions. Orders. This one felt patient. The silence stretched for hours. The black ship loomed over them like a watching eye, doing nothing, saying nothing. And then, without warning, it opened. A hatch, seamlessly hidden in its black surface, peeled apart like a blooming flower, silent, smooth, precise. A lone figure emerged. Not an alien. A man. He was thin, weak, and stumbling, barely able to hold himself upright. His hair was wild, his face sunken. His eyes were wide with terror. He fell to his knees. A moment passed before he lifted his head, his lips trembling. And then he spoke, his voice raspy, barely above a whisper. "Don't trust it." Silence. The control room stood frozen, staring at the screen. The man gasped for breath, clutching his chest as he fought to stay conscious. Then, he forced out 3 final words before collapsing. "It's not what it seems." Reed's stomach twisted. The black ship loomed behind the man, as silent as ever. Watching. Waiting. For what? No one knew. But one thing was certain. It had brought him here for a reason. A massive black ship appeared in orbit over the human colony New Horizon, silent and motionless. It did not respond to calls, nor did it make any demands. When it finally opened, a human man emerged, disheveled, weak, and terrified. Before collapsing, he uttered a cryptic warning. "Don't trust it. It's not what it seems." Now, the colony scrambles to uncover the truth before it's too late. Now. "We need a medical team out there, now." Captain Reed barked into his radio. The control center erupted into motion. Dr. Evelyn Carter, the colony's lead scientist, was already grabbing her medical bag, rushing toward the airlock. "Wait," Reed ordered, catching her arm before she could leave. "This could be a trap." Evelyn shook her head. "That man is dying, Captain. If we wait, we might never get answers." Reed clenched his jaw. She was right. But everything about this felt wrong. He turned to Lieutenant Davis. "Prep a security team. Full armor. Weapons ready, but don't fire unless I say." Davis nodded. "Yes, sir." Approaching the ship. The colony's landing bay doors hissed open, revealing the landing pad where the man lay motionless. The air was thick with tension as the security team formed a perimeter, weapons aimed at the black ship. It remained eerily silent, its hull like an endless void. Dr. Carter knelt beside the man. His skin was pale, his breath shallow. He looked starved, dehydrated, broken. "Sir, can you hear me?" she asked gently. His eyelids fluttered. Slowly, his eyes focused on her. They were bloodshot, filled with something between fear and exhaustion. He grabbed her wrist, his grip weaker than she expected. "You have to stop it," he croaked. Carter leaned in closer. "Stop what?" His lips trembled. "It's watching. Learning. It's..." He never finished. His body went limp. Carter's breath caught in her throat. "Damn it." She checked his pulse, faint, but still there. 2 medics hurried over with a stretcher, carefully lifting him. Captain Reed stepped forward, his gaze locked onto the black ship. Its hatch remained open, gaping like the maw of a beast. But no one else emerged. No crew. No aliens. Nothing. That's what made it worse. Reed motioned to Davis. "Send in a probe. I want to see inside that thing." Davis nodded, and within minutes, a small, hovering drone zipped toward the ship's entrance. It passed the threshold, its camera broadcasting to the control center. The feed flickered. Static. Then darkness. Then a face. Not human. Not anything they had ever seen before. The screen cut out. Then the drone exploded. The colony reacts. The explosion was small, but it sent shockwaves of panic through the colony. Reed cursed under his breath. "Everybody fall back." The security team moved fast, pulling back toward the colony's reinforced doors. But the ship didn't move. Didn't react. It just sat there. Waiting. Watching. Carter hurried inside as the medics rushed the unconscious man to the medical bay. "I need answers as soon as he wakes up," she told her assistant. "We need to know who he is, where he came from, and what that ship is." Reed stayed outside, staring up at the black monolith. No lights. No movement. Just silent presence. Then a low hum began to vibrate through the ground. It wasn't a weapon charging. It wasn't an engine. It was a signal. Unraveling the mystery. Back in the control center, analysts frantically worked to decipher the transmission. It wasn't in any known human or alien language. Dr. Carter's eyes darted over the data. Suddenly, her breath caught. She recognized something. The transmission wasn't a call for help. It wasn't even directed at the colony. It was a summoning signal. Someone, or something, was responding. A cold chill ran through Reed's spine as the realization hit. The ship wasn't here by accident. It had brought something else with it. And now? It was coming. Previously. The black ship remained silent, but when an unconscious human man emerged, he uttered a cryptic warning. "Don't trust it. It's not what it seems." Before the colony could uncover more, the ship sent out a signal, but not to them. It was summoning something else. Now, Captain Reed and Dr. Carter raced to decipher its message before it's too late. "Now. Tell me you have something." Captain Reed stood over Dr. Evelyn Carter's shoulder, his eyes locked on the waveform analysis flickering on her screen. The control center buzzed with frantic energy. The black ship's signal hadn't stopped. It had only gotten stronger. Evelyn's fingers flew across the keyboard, running simulations and decoding attempts. The transmission isn't in any known language, but it's got structure, mathematical precision. It's a command sequence. Reed's stomach tightened. Commanding what? She shook her head. That's what I'm trying to figure out. A loud beep interrupted them. The signal had changed. It wasn't just broadcasting anymore. Something was responding. The man wakes up. In the colony's medical bay, the unconscious man gasped, his eyes snapping open. The room was dimly lit, sterile. His body ached, his mind foggy. He tried to move, but the restraints on his arms and legs held him down. A voice spoke. "Easy. You're safe." He turned his head. "Dr. Carter." For a moment, he just stared at her, his breathing uneven. Then, his expression darkened. "No. No, I'm not." Carter leaned in. "Who are you?" His throat was dry, but he forced the words out. "Daniel Hale." He swallowed. "I was on a ship." "Not that one." He gestured weakly toward the observation window. "A different one. They took me." Carter frowned. "Who took you?" Daniel's face twisted. "I don't know what they are. But that ship. It's not a vessel. It's a trap." She stiffened. "A trap for what?" Daniel turned his head, looking straight at her. His eyes were filled with terror. "For us." A grim discovery. Meanwhile, in the control center, the translation software finally cracked part of the transmission. The signal's response wasn't just an answer. It was coordinates. Something was coming. Reed felt it before he saw it. A deep, thrumming vibration in the ground. Not an explosion. Not an earthquake. Something big had just entered the atmosphere. An alert flashed across the screen, unidentified object incoming. Reed's voice was ice cold. "Show me." The display zoomed in on the sky. At first, there was nothing. Then, the stars shifted. Something massive had just arrived. And it was descending. Panic in the colony. The alarms blared across New Horizon. People ran from the streets, locking their doors, pulling their children inside. The colony's defense turrets activated, scanning the sky for threats. Reed grabbed his radio. "Get every civilian inside, now." Lieutenant Davis's voice crackled through. "Sir, the ship is moving." Reed whipped his head around. The black ship, which had been utterly still for hours, was now shifting. Not flying. Not attacking. But changing. Panels along its surface rearranged like puzzle pieces. The hull rippled, forming new structures, something more like a spire than a ship. And then, in the distance, a second black shape descended from the sky. There was another one. Desperate measures. Reed sprinted toward the medical bay. "We need to blow that thing up, now." Daniel, still strapped to the bed, shook his head violently. "No." His voice cracked. "That's exactly what it wants." Carter turned to him, her heart pounding. "What do you mean?" Daniel struggled against his restraints. "It's waiting for you to attack. It wants you to escalate. The moment you fire." The colony's first missile launched. A direct hit. Silence. Then, the black ship reacted. It didn't explode. It didn't break. It absorbed the impact. The hull rippled again, reshaping itself. And then it sent the energy back. The shockwave slammed into the colony, knocking out power grids, toppling buildings. The defenses went offline instantly. The colony's main gate exploded inward. They were defenseless. The real enemy arrives. Reed pushed himself up, coughing through the smoke. The black ship's hatch opened again. But this time, it wasn't a human stepping out. It was something else. Tall. Unnaturally thin. Its skin was jet black, like the ship itself. It had no face. Just an empty void where one should be. It stood there for a moment, as if tasting the air. Then it turned toward the colony and started walking. Straight toward them. Straight toward Daniel. The colony on New Horizon faced a deadly threat when the black ship arrived. A human man named Daniel Hale, brought from the ship, warned them not to trust it. The ship's signal reached out to something huge, entering the planet's atmosphere. Despite an attack on the ship, it absorbed the missile's energy and sent it back, leaving the colony defenseless. Now, a faceless, unnatural entity steps from the ship, walking straight toward Daniel. Now. Reed stood, still dazed, as he watched the faceless figure approach. It wasn't human. It wasn't even close. The air around it seemed to bend, warping like heat rising from the desert floor. Every step it took left an imprint in the earth, not from weight, but from a force that pressed down, pushing reality itself aside. The colony's defenses were useless. Their missiles? Absorbed. Their weapons? Ineffective. The energy from their failed attack still buzzed through the air, creating an eerie hum. Daniel was still strapped to the bed in the medical bay. But something in him stirred, a tremor that echoed through his veins. He could feel it, the entity was connected to him. It was looking for him. The entity approaches. The faceless being paused before the wreckage of the medical bay. It towered over Reed, but didn't stop there. Its dark presence seemed to engulf the room as it moved closer to Daniel's bedside. Reed's voice cracked as he shouted, "Get back! Get back!" He raised his weapon, but it was clear there was no use. Daniel was shaking now, barely able to breathe. "It's not here for you," he whispered hoarsely. "It's here for me." The entity's empty face seemed to shimmer as it focused on him. Its body was thin, too thin, like the skin was stretched over something unnatural. "What is it?" Carter asked, moving closer to Daniel, trying to shield him. "It's not one of them. It's the Master. It controls everything." The entity reached out, slowly, deliberate. Its long, skeletal fingers hovered just above Daniel's forehead. Daniel stiffened, his eyes wide in terror. "No. Please, don't," he cried out. Reed felt an odd pressure in his chest, as if something was tightening around his heart. Was it controlling them? Or was it trying to communicate? The entity paused, as if considering. Then, a voice, not from its mouth, but in their minds, echoed, a cold, haunting whisper that chilled to the bone. "You are all nothing. Tools. Servants. Humanity has failed. You are now mine." Carter stepped forward, her voice trembling. "What does that mean? The ships. The tests. The trials. The one you call Daniel was chosen." The entity's voice grew louder. "He has proven that humanity is fit to serve." Daniel's body shuddered under the entity's touch. His eyes glazed over, almost as if he were becoming part of the ship, part of the creature's will. Reed's heart dropped. They weren't fighting an invasion. They were fighting assimilation. The ship's true purpose. Suddenly, the walls around them seemed to collapse, as though the room were shifting. The ship's power bled into the walls of the colony, disintegrating the materials with ease. Reed tried to move, but his body felt frozen, like his every instinct was being shut down. Daniel spoke, but his voice wasn't his own. It came through him as if a foreign presence were speaking through his body, twisted and alien. "The Sentinel is awake. It has watched you for centuries. The tests are over. You belong to it now." The realization hit Reed like a slap to the face. The ship wasn't a weapon, it was a prison. And the entity wasn't here to conquer. It was here to reshape humanity, to turn it into something else, something obedient. Carter's face was ashen. "We have to stop it." Reed nodded, but the words felt hollow. How could they stop something so powerful? The entity had already stripped away their strength, their weapons, and their will. Daniel's last stand. Daniel was fighting it, his hands trembling as he reached up to the entity's cold, faceless touch. "I'm not one of you." The entity only sighed, its presence growing more intense. "You are now. Humanity was always a tool for us. We built your species to serve our needs." Reed gritted his teeth. "You can't have him." He stepped forward, trying to draw his weapon, but his limbs felt too heavy. The entity looked at Reed. "You cannot protect him. He is already mine." The ship's power surged, and suddenly, Daniel's body jerked, his eyes turning black, the veins under his skin glowing with an unnatural light. But Daniel's voice broke through the entity's control. "No," his eyes locked with Reed's, the last trace of humanity shining through. "I am not a tool." In that moment, Daniel's will fought back. The turning point. With a final scream, Daniel pushed the entity away, his body convulsing as he broke free of the grip. His voice was shaky, but filled with defiance. "I'm not your servant." The entity screamed, a sound that reached into their minds, shaking them to the core. The walls of the medical bay cracked. The ship began to rattle. The battle for control wasn't over. And the true test of humanity had just begun. The black ship revealed its true purpose. It was not a mere vessel, but a prison and a tool for reshaping humanity. The entity inside, known only as the Master, sought to transform humanity into obedient servants. Daniel Hale, the only human taken and returned by the ship, was meant to be the first of many. The Master had chosen him, but Daniel fought back. With sheer defiance, he resisted the Master's control, shaking the very foundations of the ship itself. Now, the battle is no longer about survival. It is about free will. "Now!" Daniel screamed. The sound wasn't one of fear, but of resistance. The entity's grip wavered, its faceless form flickering as if struggling to hold itself together. The ship trembled, its dark hull vibrating in response to the conflict. Captain Reed staggered back, pulling Dr. Carter with him as the medical bay walls split apart, revealing the ship's endless black void beyond. Daniel's body convulsed, his eyes flashing between human and something, not human. The glow in his veins pulsed, alternating between the Master's control and his own will. Carter reached toward him. "Daniel, listen to me. You have to fight it." His head snapped toward her, his eyes wide, desperate. I don't know if I can." The Master's voice thundered, echoing inside their minds. "You are weak. Your kind has always been weak. Submit." Daniel's expression twisted, not in fear, but in anger. "Then why do you need us?" he spat. For the first time, the Master hesitated. The ship shuddered violently, and for a split second, the lights flickered, as if the entity's hold on reality itself had weakened. Reed saw it. A crack in its power. Daniel was the key. The choice that changes everything. Reed stepped forward. "Daniel, listen. It's afraid of you." Daniel's breathing was ragged. His body was breaking under the weight of the Master's control. "I can feel it," he whispered. "It's trying to take everything I am." The Master's voice boomed again. "You are not meant to fight. You are meant to serve." But now, Daniel's lips curled into a smirk. "Then why am I still standing?" The entity lashed out, trying to pull him back in, but Daniel gritted his teeth, his body glowing brighter, fighting against the force. And then, a second voice joined his. A chorus of whispers. Other voices. Not just Daniel. Not just the Master. But the voices of those who had been taken before him. The truth about the Master. Carter's breath hitched. "Oh my God. It's not just Daniel." Reed's mind raced. That was the answer. The Master wasn't some godly being, it wasn't some ultimate force of power. It was a prisoner. It had stolen lives for centuries. Absorbing them. Feeding on them. And now, those trapped souls were fighting back. Daniel fell to his knees, his body shaking. His head snapped up, his eyes glowing with a mixture of pain and power. "Help me," he gasped. "I need to break free." Reed made a split-second decision. He turned to Carter. "What if we cut the ship's power? If it's a prison, what happens if we take away its cage?" Carter's mind raced. The ship had absorbed their attacks before, but what if instead of fighting it, they starved it? "We cut its connection," she whispered. "We sever the power before it can take him completely." A desperate plan. Reed grabbed his radio. "Lieutenant Davis. Get to the main grid, shut it down. All of it." Davis's voice crackled through, panicked. "Sir, if we do that, we lose everything. No power means no defenses, no life support." Reed's voice was steel. "Do it." A moment of hesitation. Then. A colony-wide blackout. The lights died. The hum of machines vanished. And suddenly, the ship screamed. "The Master weakens." The void of the ship shuddered, its form flickering like a failing signal. The faceless figure twitched, its grip on Daniel slipping. Daniel gasped, the glow in his veins fading. His body sagged, free of its control. The Master's voice roared, but this time, it wasn't in power, it was in panic. "No. No. You do not understand. You need me." Reed's fists clenched. "We never did." The ship began to collapse, its walls shifting, folding in on themselves as if being swallowed by an unseen force. Carter grabbed Daniel as he stumbled forward. "We have to run." Reed turned to the open hatch. "Move. Everyone, move." The ground beneath them cracked, the ship imploding as it lost its hold on reality. The last remnants of the Master's presence howled in defiance. Then. Silence. The ship was gone. Aftermath, what comes next? The colony lay in ruins, but they were alive. Daniel was weak, but himself again. His hands trembled as he looked up at the sky where the black ship once loomed. It was over. Or so they thought. Because as the colony's emergency lights flickered back on, Carter saw something on the monitor. A signal. Not from the black ship. From something bigger. And this time, it wasn't just watching. It was coming. The black ship was not just a vessel, it was a prison, a feeding ground for an entity known as the Master. The colony fought back, with Daniel Hale resisting its control, and Captain Reed shutting down the colony's power to weaken it. The Master was defeated, its ship collapsing into itself. The colony survived. But now, a new signal appears, one that is far stronger than the last. The real fight is about to begin. Now. The emergency lights in the control center flickered back on, casting eerie, jagged shadows over the ruined consoles and shattered displays. Smoke curled in the air, mingling with the scent of burnt circuits and panic. Dr. Carter's fingers hovered over the cracked monitor. There was another signal. It wasn't coming from the destroyed ship. It wasn't even coming from orbit. It was coming from deep space. And it was getting closer. Captain Reed's breath came slow and steady. "How long do we have?" Carter hesitated. "If this signal is what I think it is, less than an hour." Reed clenched his fists. "We don't have time to recover." Daniel, sitting in the medical bay, stared blankly ahead, his body still trembling from his battle with the Master. He barely spoke. His mind was exhausted, his soul stretched thin. But he knew this wasn't over. He could feel it. Something bigger was coming. The betrayal. Outside, the colony was in shambles. Buildings had collapsed from the shockwaves of the black ship's destruction. Families huddled together, watching the sky, waiting for the next nightmare. And then, the gates exploded inward. Gunfire erupted. Reed whipped his head around, heart hammering. What the hell? He saw them. His own men. Or at least, what used to be his men. Lieutenant Davis stood at the front, his eyes empty, his movements unnatural. Reed's stomach dropped. They had been taken. Before the Master fell, before its ship collapsed, it had left something behind. A final trick. Davis's voice was distorted, layered with something that wasn't human. You cannot stop what is coming. You were never meant to. His soldiers raised their weapons. Reed dove for cover as bullets ripped through the air. The final trial. Carter grabbed Daniel's arm, pulling him away. We have to run. Daniel barely responded, his body weak, but he forced himself forward. They weaved through the wreckage, avoiding the gunfire as Reed returned fire, desperately trying to push back his own men. They're not in control anymore. Reed shouted. Carter panted. If we can get to the shipyard, we can use the emergency override to lock them out. Daniel's mind was a storm. He could still feel the Master's lingering presence. And he realized. It wasn't fully gone. It had left a part of itself inside his mind. Not controlling him. Not taking over. Just waiting. Testing. The ship that shouldn't exist. They burst into the colony's old shipyard, metal doors hissing closed behind them. The colony of New Horizon fought back against the entity known as the Master, which had tried to consume their will and turn humanity into its servants. With Daniel Hale's defiance, they shut down the ship's power, weakening the Master and destroying its ship. However, a new signal, stronger and more ominous, emerged, revealing that humanity's true test had only just begun. Daniel, while freed from the Master's grasp, discovered the chilling truth: the Master was merely a tool of a far greater power, and its real purpose was to test humanity's worth. Now, the stakes have never been higher. Now, the control room was in chaos. The monitors flickered, and the once serene atmosphere of the colony was now filled with intense urgency. The new signal, now unmistakably stronger, blared across every communication channel, its source growing ever closer. The sounds of distant explosions, the desperate cries of the survivors from the colony's shattered buildings, and the air of uncertainty were palpable. Every citizen was locked in fear. Reed stood at the center, his face grim. What's the source of the signal? Carter stared at the screen, her eyes wide. It's coming from deep within the galaxy. It's coming to Earth. Reed's heart sank. For all they knew, Earth might be already lost, a place where the Master had begun its legacy. They had escaped, but the real war was only about to start. Daniel, still weak but now more aware of his surroundings, stumbled into the control room. It's happening again, isn't it? Reed looked at him. This isn't just about the ships. It's about us. Daniel nodded grimly. The Master left its mark, its plan goes beyond the black ships. It was always a test. He looked at the horizon, where a new black ship hovered in the sky, casting a massive shadow over the colony's remnants. And now, we must prove we are worthy. The new test. The sky grew darker as the massive ship in the distance descended, sending ripples through the atmosphere. As the ship drew closer, a strange hum filled the air, the vibration resonating deep within the bones of every human who could hear it. The colony had been abandoned, but their final trial was here, and humanity's fate rested on the choices made in the coming moments. We can't just wait for it to come, Carter whispered. We need to find a way to face it, on our terms. Reed, his face resolute, nodded. We make our stand. The choice is ours. Now or never. The signal grew louder, clearer, a siren call that seemed to pierce the very fabric of space and time. It was not coming from a ship or an entity but something deeper, more ancient. The source. They had been judged, and now they were given a final trial, one where humanity's strength would be tested not by war, but by its sacrifice, compassion, and unity. Would they destroy what they did not understand? Would they fight or would they serve? The real decision was now in their hands. The moment of truth.